The Thursday morning sun always hit my little office just right, cutting a clean golden rectangle across the oak desk my late husband Frank had built. It was the kind of peaceful light that made you believe anything was possible. I cradled my favorite ceramic mug, the steam from the dark roast coffee warming my face, and looked at the number on the screen. Num. Cum. It was a lot of money, enough to make my stomach do a little flip. But then I glanced at the photo on the corner of my desk. It was my David, my son, squinting in the sun with that brilliant, confident smile he's had since he was a boy. He was standing in front of a glass building, his arms crossed, looking every bit the visionary CEO he was about to become. That smile always settled my nerves. This wasn't an expense. It was an investment. It was the fuel for his genius. With a deep breath that smelled of coffee and conviction, I clicked the button. Confirm transfer. The little blue loading circle spun for a second, and then a cheerful green checkmark appeared with a soft ding from the computer speakers. Done. Another quarterly investment into Innovate Solutions. Another step closer to David's breakthrough. I could almost hear him now, his voice buzzing with excitement over the phone, using words like scaling and disrupting the market and finalizing the seed round. I didn't understand all of it. Not really. But I understood the passion in his voice. That's what mattered. Frank had been a pragmatist, a man who believed in pensions and savings bonds. He never would have understood a venture like this, but I did. I saw the future in David. My phone buzzed on the desk, rattling against the wood. It was my sister, Elaine. I smiled and picked it up, feeling the warm glow of my good deeds settle over me. "Morning, Laney," I chirped. "You're up early." There was a pause on the other end, just long enough for me to notice. "Just watering my roses. You sound chipper," she said. Her voice was even, but I knew my sister. I'd known her for High years. I knew the subtle difference between her casual questions and her interrogations disguised as casual questions. "Just getting a few things done," I said, my voice a little too bright. David's quarterly funding was due. He says they're on the cusp of something huge. A new software update that's going to streamline. Well, it's all very technical, but it's incredibly promising. I was babbling. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could practically hear her pursing her lips, the way she does when she thinks I'm being a fool. "That's nice, Carol," she finally said. The words were polite, but they landed like little stones. "Say, did you ever look into that tour of the Italian lakes we talked about? The one for September? I saw a brochure, and the early bird discount ends next week." A little bit of the air seemed to leave the room. The brochure for the Italian lakes I'd been eyeing on my counter suddenly looked flat, like a picture of someone else's life. The Italy trip. We'd been talking about it for years. A dream we'd deferred while we were raising kids and then caring for our husbands. Now we were free. Except I wasn't. "Oh, things are just a bit tight this quarter," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. This investment was crucial. "Maybe next year, Elaine. Once David's company takes off, I'll take you to Italy, first class." She didn't answer right away. She just let my empty promise hang in the air between us. "Okay, Carol," she said, her voice soft now, and that was so much worse than her judgment. It was pity. "Just take care of yourself, okay? Don't forget to fund your own life, too." We said our goodbyes, and I placed the phone back on the desk with a hand that was suddenly unsteady. The sunlight in the room seemed harsh now, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Her words echoed in the quiet space. "Fund your own life." I shook my head, pushing the doubt away. She didn't get it. She didn't have a son like David. My life, my savings, my dreams, they were all tied up in his. His success would be my success. I looked back at his smiling face in the silver frame, a son frozen in a moment of perfect, promising potential. I had to believe in him, because if I didn't, what did that say about the last 3 years and the tamui hum I'd already poured into that perfect, promising smile? The Thursday morning sun always hit my little office just right, cutting a clean golden rectangle across the oak desk my late husband Frank had built. It was the kind of peaceful light that made you believe anything was possible. I cradled my favorite ceramic mug, the steam from the dark roast coffee warming my face, and looked at the number on the screen. Num. Cum. It was a lot of money, enough to make my stomach do a little flip. But then I glanced at the photo on the corner of my desk. It was my David, my son, squinting in the sun with that brilliant, confident smile he's had since he was a boy. He was standing in front of a glass building, his arms crossed, looking every bit the visionary CEO he was about to become. That smile always settled my nerves. This wasn't an expense. It was an investment. It was the fuel for his genius. With a deep breath that smelled of coffee and conviction, I clicked the button. Confirm transfer. The little blue loading circle spun for a second, and then a cheerful green checkmark appeared with a soft ding from the computer speakers. Done. Another quarterly investment into Innovate Solutions. Another step closer to David's breakthrough. I could almost hear him now, his voice buzzing with excitement over the phone, using words like scaling and disrupting the market and finalizing the seed round. I didn't understand all of it. Not really, but I understood the passion in his voice. That's what mattered. Frank had been a pragmatist, a man who believed in pensions and savings bonds. He never would have understood a venture like this, but I did. I saw the future in David. My phone buzzed on the desk, rattling against the wood. It was my sister, Elaine. I smiled and picked it up, feeling the warm glow of my good deeds settle over me. "Morning, Laney," I chirped. "You're up early." There was a pause on the other end, just long enough for me to notice. "Just watering my roses. You sound chipper," she said. Her voice was even, but I knew my sister. I'd known her for High years. I knew the subtle difference between her casual questions and her interrogations disguised as casual questions. "Just getting a few things done," I said, my voice a little too bright. David's quarterly funding was due. He says they're on the cusp of something huge. A new software update that's going to streamline. Well, it's all very technical, but it's incredibly promising. I was babbling. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could practically hear her pursing her lips, the way she does when she thinks I'm being a fool. "That's nice, Carol," she finally said. The words were polite, but they landed like little stones. "Say, did you ever look into that tour of the Italian lakes we talked about? The one for September? I saw a brochure, and the early bird discount ends next week." A little bit of the air seemed to leave the room. The brochure for the Italian lakes I'd been eyeing on my counter suddenly looked flat, like a picture of someone else's life. The Italy trip. We'd been talking about it for years. A dream we'd deferred while we were raising kids and then caring for our husbands. Now we were free. Except I wasn't. "Oh, things are just a bit tight this quarter," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. This investment was crucial. "Maybe next year, Elaine. Once David's company takes off, I'll take you to Italy, first class." She didn't answer right away. She just let my empty promise hang in the air between us. "Okay, Carol," she said, her voice soft now, and that was so much worse than her judgment. It was pity. "Just take care of yourself, okay? Don't forget to fund your own life, too." We said our goodbyes, and I placed the phone back on the desk with a hand that was suddenly unsteady. The sunlight in the room seemed harsh now, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Her words echoed in the quiet space. "Fund your own life." I shook my head, pushing the doubt away. She didn't get it. She didn't have a son like David. My life, my savings, my dreams, they were all tied up in his. His success would be my success. I looked back at his smiling face in the silver frame, a son frozen in a moment of perfect, promising potential. I had to believe in him, because if I didn't, what did that say about the last 3 years and the tamui whom I'd already poured into that perfect, promising smile? The silence after I hung up with Elaine was heavier than it should have been. It seemed to press in on me, sticking to the cheerful yellow walls of my office. To fill the quiet, I did what I always do. I picked up my phone, the smooth, cool glass a familiar comfort in my palm. I just wanted a simple distraction, a mental palate cleanser. I opened up the endless scroll of social media, my thumb flicking upwards in a steady, mindless rhythm. A friend's vacation photos from Arizona, all red rocks and blue sky. A recipe for lemon chicken I knew I'd never make. A political article that made my temples throb just looking at the headline. I kept scrolling, looking for a picture of a puppy or a grandchild, anything to shake the lingering chill of my sister's words. And then I saw it. It wasn't on David's page, or even Sam's. It was a photo shared by a woman I vaguely recognized as one of Sam's cousins, a bright, slightly blurry group shot from a backyard party. My eyes scanned the smiling faces and stopped, frozen. There, in the center of the crowd, stood David and Sam. They were beaming, his arm wrapped protectively around her, and her hands were cradling a small, unmistakable baby bump. I must have forgotten how to breathe. All the air in my lungs felt stale, and the only thing I could hear was a faint, high-pitched ringing in my ears, like a wire pulled too tight. I sat up straighter, my thumb hovering over the screen. A bump, a definite, 5 months or so bump. My mind started racing, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was an old photo? But David was wearing the gray polo shirt I just sent him for his birthday. My thumb, now trembling slightly, tapped on the cousin's name. Her profile was open, a public window into a world I hadn't known existed. The first thing I saw was a whole album, posted just last Saturday. The title of it was Sam, David's Big Reveal. My heart started a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. A reveal? With a shaking hand, I opened it. The first picture was of a long table draped in pink and blue tablecloths, covered in food. The next showed Sam standing with her mother and a group of women, all laughing, their hands on her belly. Then a picture of a cake, half frosted in pink, half in blue, with the words Prince or Princess, written in looping silver icing. Picture after picture, a story unfolded in vibrant, oversaturated color, a story of joy and celebration. There were dozens of people there, uncles, aunts, cousins, friends, all of them smiling, hugging, celebrating my son, my daughter-in-law, and my grandchild. A grandchild I never knew existed. My thumb swiped faster, a frantic, desperate search for something, anything, that made sense. I felt like I was looking through a keyhole at a party in my own honor that I hadn't been invited to. Then I landed on the Mayan photo, the one Sam herself had posted to her timeline. It was a beautiful shot, probably taken by a professional. David and Sam stood on a pristine green lawn under a canopy of oak trees, holding a black balloon between them. The next photo in the sequence was the moment of the pop, a cloud of brilliant blue powder exploding into the air around their laughing faces. Below it was the caption, 5 little words that took the air from my lungs and shattered the sunlit peace of my morning into a million tiny pieces. It read, sharing our amazing news with the people who truly matter. It's a boy. The people who truly matter. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the desk. The sound was sharp, violent in the stillness of the room. My own hands were ice cold. I stared at the screen, at the smiling faces of my son and his wife, enveloped in that cloud of blue. It was the smile from the photo on my desk, the confident, brilliant smile of a visionary. But it wasn't visionary. It was the smile of a stranger, a happy man I didn't know at all. The cheerful ding of the bank transfer confirmation echoed in my mind, a mocking little chime that now sounded like a fool's bell. The money I'd sent not 3 hours ago. Was it for his business? For scaling and seed rounds? Or was it for this? For the professional photographer, the catering, the giant banner that read, Little Prince on the way, that I could now see in the background of another photo. The money I'd pulled from the fund Frank had left me, the fund meant for my trip to Italy, for my security, for my life, had PA'd for a party to celebrate the most important moment of my son's life with people he considered more important than me. I wasn't a cherished investor in his dream. I was just the anonymous donor, the ATM. I leaned back in my chair, the polished wood cold against my spine. The sunbeam had moved across the room, and my corner of the office was now in shadow. My coffee sat on the desk, untouched and cold. The shock wasn't just heartbreak. It was a terrifying, profound disillusionment, a sudden, violent tearing away of a veil. And in the cold, clear reality that remained, something new and hard began to form in my chest, right where the warmth and pride used to be. I don't know how long I sat there, adrift in the shadowed corner of my office. Time seemed to have stretched and thinned, becoming meaningless. The thudding in my chest had subsided, replaced by a strange and unnerving stillness, a profound cold that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. It was an internal winter. It was the kind of cold that starts in your stomach and spreads outwards, a deep internal chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Even the warm mug of coffee I'd left on the desk seemed to radiate cold. My gaze was fixed on the framed photo of David, on that familiar, beloved smile that was now a grotesque mask. Every memory I had of that smile was now suspect, every proud moment tainted. The phone on my desk suddenly vibrated, a harsh, buzzing sound that made me jump. I looked down at the screen. It was him. A picture of his smiling face, the very same one from the frame, lit up the display. My first instinct was to let it ring, to throw the phone against the wall and watch it shatter. But then, the new, hard thing in my chest took over. My hand moved with a steadiness that felt alien, and I answered, pressing the phone to my ear without a word. "Mom! Hey! Did you get my email this morning?" His voice was exactly the same as always, bright, breezy, and completely oblivious. It was the voice of a man calling his mother, not the stranger I had just seen on my screen. I just wanted to make sure the wire went through. The coders are waiting on a software license renewal. And you know how it is? Everything's a subscription these days. We're dead in the water without it. The sheer, breathtaking normalcy of his request was like a slap in the face. Here I was, my world tilted on its axis, and he was talking about software licenses. The ice in my veins seemed to creep up my throat, chilling my words. "I saw your announcement on social media, David," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of any inflection. It sounded like someone else's. There was a beat of silence on his end. I could almost picture his face, the easy smile faltering for just a second. "Oh, yeah, that. We were going to tell you, Mom, really. It all just happened so fast. Sam wanted to wait until the second trimester was over, just to be safe. We were planning a special call to you this weekend." The lie was so smooth, so practiced. It slid into the air between us, another brick in a wall I was only now realizing had been there for years. A special call. Days after they'd told the rest of the world, after the blue powder had settled, after my money had been spent. I wasn't the first call. I was an item on a to-do list. The new, cold clarity in my mind was sharp as a shard of glass. "I need to review my portfolio, David," I said, the words feeling strange and powerful in my mouth. "Things have been a little volatile. I'll have to get back to you about the transfer." "Review your portfolio?" "Mom, what are you talking about?" The breezy tone was gone, replaced by a whine of impatience. "It's $5,000. It's the quarterly investment. We talked about this." "Yes," I said, my gaze sweeping over my desk, my home, the life I had built. "We did. But I need to review the terms. I'll be in touch." Before he could argue, I ended the call. My finger pressed the red button, severing the connection, and the silence that rushed back in was a relief. It was my silence. In my house, for the first time, it felt like I owned it. My hands, still steady, moved to the keyboard. The password to my online banking portal was my son's birthday. The irony was a bitter taste at the back of my throat. I clicked through the menus, my movements precise and mechanical. I wasn't looking for this month's balance. I was going on an archaeological dig of my own foolishness. I set the transaction history to the last 3 years and selected outgoing transfers. The list that populated the screen was a monument to my blindness, page after page of it. Hung. Innovate Solutions. Hi, Numchum. Innovate Solutions. Bye. Hung. A note next to it. Server upgrade. Ba. Hung. Emergency payroll. On and on it went. A steady, relentless draining of the foundation Frank had left for me. I exported the data to a spreadsheet, the program's sterile columns giving a brutal order to my chaos. As I watched the numbers add up at the bottom of the screen, the breath I was holding escaped in a ragged gasp. The final tally glowed in a small black font, a quiet, damning epitaph for my naivety. Tamui ba, hai tam namui. My heart didn't break. It didn't pound. It just felt still. $83,000. The cost of my trip to Italy, 10 times over. The new roof I'd been putting off. the cushion that was supposed to protect me in my old age. All of it, gone, transformed into blue balloons and catered parties and a life I was not a part of. The sun was setting now, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. I sat there in the growing dark, the only light coming from the glowing numbers on the computer screen. The grief and the shock were still there, somewhere deep inside me, but they were frozen now, encased in a thick, protective layer of ice, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my very soul, that the thaw would not be a gentle one. For 3 days, the house was silent. It was a heavy, loaded silence, filled with everything I hadn't said to David. I didn't call him. He didn't call me. I spent the time cleaning with a methodical fury, scrubbing floors and polishing furniture Frank had made, trying to impose some kind of order on the chaos churning inside me. On Saturday afternoon, as I was wiping down the crystal-clear face of the grandfather clock in the hall, the doorbell chimed, a sharp, 2-note sound that sliced through the quiet. My heart gave a single, hard jolt. I knew who it was. Through the beveled glass of the front door, I could see their distorted shapes, David's tall frame, Sam's softer silhouette beside him. I took one deep, steadying breath, my hand resting on the cool, solid wood of the clock, and opened the door. They stood on my porch, bathed in the bright afternoon sun, wearing matching strained smiles. Sam was in a stylish blue maternity dress that elegantly showcased the belly I was never supposed to have seen. "Mom, we were in the neighborhood and thought we'd pop by," David said, his tone a little too casual. It was the same tone he used when he was about to ask for something big. "Hello, David." "Samantha," I said, my voice even. I stepped back and held the door open. I didn't smile. I didn't ask them about their day. I led them into the living room, the same room where we'd had 1,000 comfortable family chats, and gestured to the sofa. The air was thick with unspoken words. On the coffee table, where a tray of cookies and tea should have been, sat a single, neatly folded stack of papers. David sat down, trying to maintain his easygoing charade. "So," he began, rubbing his hands together, "did you manage to get things sorted out with that portfolio? I sent you another email with the updated business plan, the one with the 5-year projection. We're really on a knife's edge here, Mom." I didn't answer. I simply sat down in the armchair opposite them, Frank's chair, and picked up the papers. I unfolded them and slid them across the polished surface of the table. The spreadsheet's stark columns and bolded final number faced him, an irrefutable testament. David's eyes scanned the page. I watched the confident mask melt away in real time. First, a flicker of confusion, then a dawning horror as his gaze locked on the final sum at the bottom. His face, which had been open and charming, seemed to shrink, the color Dr. raining from his cheeks. Sam, ever the strategist, saw her husband faltering and immediately stepped in. She leaned forward, her voice soft and syrupy, placing a perfectly manicured hand on her stomach. "Carolyn," she said, using my first name, which she only did when she was trying to sound sincere. "I know this is a shock. We were just so excited, and we know how much you've always wanted to be a grandmother. Everything we're building, this whole business, it's not for us, it's for him, for your grandson, to give him a future." Her eyes were wide and glistening, a perfect performance of vulnerable motherhood. But the ice in my veins didn't melt. I looked from her expertly played hand to my son's pale, tight-lipped face. I waited. "A future?" David finally spat out, his voice low and raw. He shoved the papers back across the table. "This is my future you're looking at. This is 3 years of my life, my work. I can't believe you'd even print this out like I'm some kind of criminal." He stood up, pacing in front of the fireplace, his hands gesturing wildly. "After everything I've worked for, everything I've sacrificed, you're going to pull the rug out from under me now. You're supposed to be my biggest supporter." His words hit me, but not in the way he intended. They were a key, unlocking a memory I had buried deep. Suddenly, I wasn't in the living room on a sunny Saturday. I was standing by this very fireplace 15 years ago, Frank's face etched with a weary disappointment. David, then a junior in college, had maxed out a credit card on a spring break trip, and I had just paid it off behind Frank's back. "You're not helping him, Carol." Frank's voice was low, laced with a sorrow that had broken my heart. You're coddling him. Every time you rescue him from a consequence, you make him weaker. One day, you'll have to stop catching him, and he won't know how to land." I blinked, and the memory was gone, but the truth of it remained, sharp and painful. I had spent 15 years proving my husband right. I looked at my son, this angry, petulant man-child, demanding to be caught once Again and I finally saw him clearly. I saw the weakness I had so lovingly nurtured. My voice, when I spoke, was quieter than it had been all afternoon, but it carried the weight of Frank's grandfather clock ticking steadily in the hall. "The sacrifices," I said, looking directly into David's furious eyes, "were mine, and your father was right. It's time you learned how to land." I stood up, my body feeling lighter than it had in years. The bank of Mom is closed, permanently. The silence that followed was absolute. David stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, the anger in his eyes curdling into sheer disbelief. Sam's mask of sweet concern had vanished, replaced by a cold, hard glare. She knew this wasn't a negotiation. "You can't be serious," David whispered, his voice cracking. "You'd throw away your own son's future? Your grandson's future? Over what? Because you weren't invited to a party?" He made it sound so petty, so small. But we both knew it was about so much more than that. No, it was about a lifetime of lies, a foundation of deceit that had just crumbled to dust. I didn't need to answer him. I just stood there, a quiet, unmovable statue of resolve. Sam grabbed her purse and stood up, pulling on David's arm. "Let's go, David," she hissed, her voice sharp as a shard of glass. "There's nothing here for us." He let himself be pulled toward the door by Sam, but he turned back in the entryway, his face a storm of confusion and rage. "This isn't over," he snarled. I didn't answer. I just watched them go, letting the screen door slam behind them, leaving the heavy oak door slightly ajar in their furious wake. I stood there for a moment, listening to the sound of their car engine roaring to life and then fading down the street until there was only the ticking of the grandfather clock. Then, with a steadiness that felt new and unfamiliar, I walked to the front door. My hand didn't tremble as I took hold of the cold brass of the deadbolt. With a slow, deliberate turn of my wrist, I slid the bolt into place. The sharp, metallic click echoed in the sudden quiet of the hall. It was a sound of absolute finality. A single, unarguable syllable that answered his threat. "Yes, it is." I leaned my forehead, against the cool wood of the door. The battle had left a faint tremor in my limbs, and a strange, hollow ache settled behind my ribs, the specific grief of mourning someone who was still alive, the phantom limb of the son I thought I had. But that single, satisfying click had changed everything. It was the sound of a fortress gate closing. For the first time in years, the air one breathed felt like it was truly my own, inside the safe, quiet walls of a life I was finally reclaiming. The weeks that followed were a strange mixture of grief and liberation. The silence from David was a physical presence in the house, a constant reminder of the chasm that had opened between us. Some days the grief was a lead weight in my chest, a sorrow for the son I had lost, or perhaps for the son I had never truly had. But other days, I would wake up and feel a lightness I hadn't realized was missing. I started spending my mornings in the garden, a space I had neglected for years. My hands, which had grown accustomed to the smooth chill of my phone and the click of a keyboard, rediscovered the feeling of rich, dark earth. I pulled up tangled weeds with a satisfying fierceness and planted new-life petunias and lavender and a row of stubborn tomato vines. I was reclaiming my territory, 1 square foot at a time. One afternoon, I did something truly radical. I called my old friend Maria, a woman I'd worked side by side with for 20 years in the cardiac unit at St. Michael's. We met for lunch at a little cafe downtown, and as we sat there, the years seemed to melt away. We talked about our nursing days, our families, our quiet retirements. "You look good, Carol," Maria said, stirring her iced tea. "There's a spark back in your eye." I gave her a watery smile. "I'm working on it," I admitted, and for the first time, I told someone the whole story. I expected shock or pity. Instead, Maria just nodded slowly, a look of profound understanding on her face. "My nephew," she said quietly. "For years he saw my home as his personal line of credit. The day I finally said no, he told me I was dead to him. It hurt like hell. But a funny thing happened. A year later he called me, just to see how I was doing. For the first time, he needed nothing. That's when I knew I had my nephew back, and he finally had a real aunt." Her story was a quiet gift of solidarity, a reassurance that I wasn't a monster, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go. I drove home from that lunch feeling stronger, the ground beneath my feet a little more solid. The afternoon sun was warm on my face as I pruned the rose bushes, the scent of fresh-cut stems filling the air. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. And then, the phone rang. The shrill sound cut through the tranquil afternoon, and my stomach instantly clenched. The screen lit up with David's name. I hesitated, my dirt-caked thumb hovering over the screen. I almost declined it, but some instinct told me this was a battle I had to face. I answered, "Mom, thank God." His voice was a frantic, breathless whisper, stripped of all its usual confidence. "It's Sam. Something's wrong. We're at the hospital. The doctors are saying, they're saying it might be a placental abruption. There was blood, Mom, so much blood." The words were designed to strike terror into the heart of any mother, but they had a special resonance for a nurse. I felt a reflexive jolt of professional concern, my mind automatically cycling through triage questions. Is she stable? What's her blood pressure? Are they monitoring the fetal heartbeat? I asked, my voice crisp and clinical. "I don't know," he cried, his voice cracking with expertly performed panic. "They're talking about long-term observation, specialists. It's a nightmare. Our insurance is giving us the runaround on coverage for a high-risk unit." He took a ragged breath. "Look, we found a program, a private one, with the best neonatal specialist in the state. But we need to secure a bigger place closer to the hospital, and the program requires proof of financial stability. The bank, they won't approve us for the loan without a cosigner." "Mom, I hate to ask. I swear I do. But this is for the baby. This is for your grandson." He put Sam on the phone. Her voice was a faint, tearful whisper. "Carolyn, I'm so scared," she whimpered. "Please, we need you." It was a masterful performance. They were targeting my deepest instincts, my love for a grandson I'd never met, and my identity as a caregiver. But as I listened, a cold, hard kernel of doubt formed in my gut. Something was wrong. His recitation of the medical terms sounded just that, recited. A placental abruption with that much bleeding would have meant an emergency C-section, not a calm discussion about real estate. My nurse's brain, the part of me they were trying to manipulate, was the very thing that was screaming a warning. "Let me see what I can do, David." I said, my voice carefully neutral. "I'll call you back." I hung up before they could press further. My hands were perfectly steady. I walked into the kitchen, wiped the dirt from my fingers, and looked up the number for the main maternity ward at City General, the hospital he'd mentioned. A calm, efficient-sounding woman answered. "Maternity," she said. "Yes," I replied, my voice cool as ice. "I'm calling to get a room number for my daughter-in-law, Samantha Brooks." There was a pause, the faint clicking of a keyboard. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the nurse said. "I don't have a patient by that name currently admitted." My heart didn't sink. It hardened. "Could you check the emergency admissions for the last Heimweh Bone hours?" I asked, just to be sure. Another pause. "No, ma'am, no one by that name." I thanked her and ended the call. I stood in my sun-drenched kitchen, the phone still in my hand. The lie was so monstrous, so profoundly vile, that it took my breath away. This wasn't a desperate plea for help. This was a calculated predatory attack. They had dangled the life of their unborn child, my grandson, in front of me like a piece of bait. They had tried to use my life's work, my decades of caring for the sick and vulnerable, as a key to unlock my bank account. A wave of disgust, so powerful it was nauseating, washed over me. It was worse than the exclusion, worse than the financial drain. This was a violation of something sacred. They hadn't just underestimated my intelligence, they had underestimated my core. I placed the phone gently back in its cradle. The fragile peace of the afternoon was shattered, but so was the last vestige of my grief. What remained was a cold, pure, and righteous fury. This was no longer a family dispute. It was a war, and they had just shown me they would stop at nothing to win. A full week passed in absolute silence. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet, the kind that precedes a storm. I knew they wouldn't just give up. The phantom emergency had been a desperate, clumsy attack. Their next move, I suspected, would be more calculated. I found myself living in a state of low-grade anxiety. My body tensed for a blow I couldn't see coming. Every time the phone rang, my heart leaped into my throat. Every car that slowed on my street made me glance out the window. I was a soldier in a war of nerves, and the waiting was a form of torture in itself. The attack, when it finally came, didn't arrive with a ring or a knock. It arrived with the gentle thud of the mail ale dropping through the slot in my front door. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was just finishing my coffee. I sorted through the usual stack bills, junk mail, a catalog for garden supplies, and then I saw it. It was a long, thick envelope made of heavy, cream-colored paper that felt expensive to the touch. In the top left corner, embossed in elegant navy blue script, were the words, "Lockwood, Finch, Associates, Attorneys at Law." My breath hitched. My hands, which had been steady all morning, began to tremble. I carried the letter into the living room as if it were a venomous snake, placing it carefully on the coffee table. The grandfather clock ticked, each second a slow, deliberate beat of a drum. Using a silver letter opener from Frank's desk, I slit the envelope with surgical precision. The paper inside was just as thick, just as elegant as the envelope. The words, printed in a crisp, clear font, were polite, professional, and more terrifying than any shouted threat could ever be. It began, "Dear Mrs. Brooks." It went on to say that their clients, Mr. David and Mrs. Samantha Brooks, had retained their services. It spoke of their deep and abiding love for me. And then came the sentences that made the blood run cold in my veins. "Out of an abundance of concern for your recent health and well-being," I read, the words starting to blur, "and with the impending arrival of their first child, our clients feel it is a matter of familial importance to open a dialogue. They have expressed a sincere desire to ensure a stable and secure future for their child, which naturally includes the responsible stewardship of the family's collective assets. To that end, we would like to cordially invite you to a private mediation at our offices to discuss these matters in the interest of restoring family harmony." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel the vibration in my teeth. Concern for my well-being. Responsible stewardship. Family harmony. The words were a smokescreen, a velvet glove disguising an iron fist. I didn't need a law degree to translate. "We think you're unstable. We want to control your money. And if you refuse to cooperate, we will take you to court and argue that you are incompetent." The letter was a declaration of war, impeccably typed and legally sanitized. For a long moment, the printed words on the page seemed to lift and swim. For a moment, the room felt like it was tilting, as if the floorboards themselves could no longer hold my weight. It was the dizzying, gut-wrenching fear of a total loss of control. I saw it all unfold in my mind. A courtroom filled with strangers, a lawyer painting me as a confused, paranoid old woman, my son testifying with false sincerity about my erratic behavior. I saw them winning. I saw them taking everything: my home, my savings, my autonomy, leaving me as a ward in my own life, my decisions subject to the approval of the two people who had so callously betrayed me. The thought was so terrifying that it almost broke me. Almost. I looked up at the mantelpiece, at the photos of my parents, of Frank and me on our wedding day, of a younger, happier David. This was my life, the one I had built, the one Frank and I had protected. I had been a fool for years, but I would not be a coward now. The fear didn't vanish, but my righteous fury returned, a hot, cleansing fire that burned away the panic. This was not just about money anymore. This was about my right to exist as a sane, independent human being. They had fired the first shot. It was time to fire back. I walked on steady legs to my office, the letter clutched in my hand. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, my fingers moving with a new and unfamiliar purpose. I didn't search for advice or sympathy. I typed 3 words into the search bar. Best estate lawyer, city. I spent the next hour meticulously reading reviews. dismissing the flashy advertisers, looking for a name that conveyed quiet, unshakable competence. I found it in a woman named Eleanor Vance, a senior partner at a small, highly respected firm, whose biography said she specialized in elder law and asset protection. I picked up the phone and dialed the number. A calm, professional voice answered. "Law offices of Vance and Sterling. How may I help you?" My voice, when I spoke, was as calm and professional as hers. "My name is Carolyn Brooks." I said, my gaze falling on the menacing cream-colored letter on my desk. "I need to schedule a consultation with Ms. Vance as soon as possible. I've just received a letter regarding my estate from my son's attorneys. I set the appointment for the following afternoon." After I hung up, I sat in the quiet of my office, the ticking of the clock from the hall a steady, reassuring presence. The fear was still there, a cold knot in the pit of my stomach, but it was no longer alone. It now had a companion, a steely, focused, and absolute resolve. Lockwood, Finch-Associates, had sent me an invitation. I was about to send them my reply. The law offices of Vance and Sterling were on the 12th floor of a downtown building, with a view of the entire city stretching out below. The office itself was quiet and smelled of old books, leather, and freshly brewed coffee. It was a world away from the flowery wallpaper and ticking clock of my own home, and the very air seemed to promise calm, professional competence. Eleanor Vance was a woman in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a handshake that was firm and reassuring. I sat across the wide mahogany desk from her, and for the second time in my life, I told the whole story. I started with the first $5,000 investment, my voice trembling as I recounted my own blindness. But as I continued, speaking of the social media post, the phantom emergency, and finally, the letter that now lay between us on the polished desk, my voice grew steady. I was no longer telling a story of heartbreak. I was giving a witness statement. Eleanor listened without interruption, her fingers steepled under her chin. When I finished, she gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Carolyn," she said, her voice both empathetic and steel-edged, "thank you for trusting me with this. And let me be perfectly clear, what you have described is a classic textbook case of elder financial exploitation with a prelude to a coercive control lawsuit. Hearing my messy, painful family drama described in such clinical, legal terms was jarring, but it was also incredibly validating. I wasn't just an emotional, scorned mother. I was the victim of a recognizable legal tactic. The letter," she continued, tapping a perfectly manicured ale on the creamy paper, "is a beautifully worded piece of intimidation. The language, concern, stewardship, is designed to make you feel isolated and unstable, to scare you into handing over control without a fight. They don't want a war, they want a swift, quiet surrender." She leaned forward, her sharp eyes meeting mine. "But we are not going to surrender. We are going to build a fortress of facts so solid that their concerns will look exactly like what they are. Greed. I want everything, Carolyn. Every bank statement, every email, every text message. We will create a timeline that leaves no room for doubt." I left her office an hour later feeling doctor-ained, but with a clear, actionable plan. The fear was still there, but now it had a direction. It was no longer a paralyzing fog. It was fuel. As I turned onto my street, my headlights cut through the evening gloom, and I saw a familiar sedan parked in front of my house. My heart leaped, but this time, it wasn't with fear. Elaine was sitting on my front porch steps, a small suitcase next to her, her face illuminated by the pale glow of the porch light. I stumbled out of the car, and she was on her feet in an instant, her arms wrapping around me. "I called you this afternoon, and you didn't answer," she said, her voice muffled in my shoulder. I had a bad feeling, so I packed a bag and drove. All the tension, all the fear I had been holding in so tightly, finally broke. I sobbed into my sister's embrace, on my own front porch. Great, ragged tears of sorrow and relief. "You tried to tell me, Lainey," I whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't listen." She just held me tighter. "There's nothing to be sorry for," she said fiercely. "You loved your son. Now, we're going to teach him what happens when you mess with a Brooks sister." My office, which had been a place of solitary pain, became our war room. For the next 3 days, we were a two-woman army. Elaine, with her ruthless practicality, was my general. We brewed pot after pot of coffee and began the painstaking work of excavation. We printed out 3 years of bank statements, highlighting every transfer to David with a fluorescent yellow marker until the pages glowed with the evidence of my folly. We scrolled through years of text messages, the screen of my phone a ghostly blue in the dim room, screenshotting every manipulative plea for money, every vague promise of repayment. The work was emotionally brutal. Every highlighted line was a fresh stab of betrayal, a reminder of a lie I had willingly believed. When my resolve wavered, Elaine was there. "Look at this one," she'd say, her voice dripping with scorn. "Need to cover the patent filing fee, Mom. It's urgent. The only thing he's ever invented is a new way to cash your checks." Her anger was a shield, protecting me from my own grief, allowing me to focus on the task. That night, as I sat staring blankly at a spreadsheet, overwhelmed, the smell of sautéing garlic and onions drifted in from the kitchen. Elaine had quietly slipped away and was now making her famous spaghetti sauce, a recipe our mother had taught us. She didn't say anything. She just brought me a steaming bowl and a glass of red wine and sat with me while I ate. In the warm, fragrant kitchen, surrounded by the ghosts of our childhood, we weren't a victim and a rescuer. We were just sisters. We were home. By the end of the week, we had it. A thick, 3-inch binder, meticulously organized with tabs and dates. It was a fortress, just as Eleanor had said. A fortress built of my own mistakes, but a fortress nonetheless. That evening, Eleanor called. "The mediation is set for next Wednesday," she said. "They've booked the main conference room at their firm. They're planning on an intimidation tactic." I looked over at the binder sitting on the desk, a solid, tangible weight. I looked at my sister, who gave me a firm, determined nod. "Let them," I said, my voice clear and steady. "We'll be ready." The conference room at Lockwood, Finch AES Associates, was clearly designed to intimidate. It was a vast, cold space on the top floor, dominated by a gargantuan mahogany table polished to a mirror shine. A wall of glass offered a dizzying view of the city below, making you feel small and exposed. We sat on one side, me, Eleanor, and Elaine, who I'd insisted come with me. On the other side sat their team. Mr. Finch, a man with silver hair and a smile that never reached his eyes, a junior associate who avoided looking at us, and my son and his wife. David fidgeted with his tie, his gaze fixed on the table's gleaming surface. Sam, however, looked serene, her hands resting calmly on her pregnant belly, the very picture of a wronged but benevolent mother-to-be. "Mr. Finch began, his voice a smooth, condescending purr. He spoke of the sanctity of family, of unfortunate misunderstandings that can arise during times of emotional distress. He painted a picture of a loving son and daughter-in-law, deeply concerned for a mother who had recently shown troubling signs of paranoia and fiscal irresponsibility. His proposed solution was simple: a family trust, managed by a neutral third party, which he would help select, with David and Sam acting as advisors. It was a complete financial takeover, gift-wrapped in the language of love. When he finished, a smug silence settled over the room. Eleanor didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached into her leather briefcase and retrieved our weapon. She placed the thick, 3-inch binder on the table. The solid thud it made echoed in the cavernous room, a sound of irrefutable substance. "Thank you for your narrative, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice cutting through the polite facade. "Now let's discuss the facts." She opened the binder. For the next 20 minutes, she spoke in a calm, lethal monotone, her words dismantling their story piece by piece. She presented the spreadsheet of the Damui Ba Hai Chamnamui in transfers. She cross-referenced the dates of the largest transfers with public records, showing David's business had failed to file taxes for the last 2 years. She read aloud David's manipulative text messages, her voice flat and devoid of emotion, making the words themselves sound even more grotesque. The color began to drain from David's face. Sam's serene smile tightened at the edges. Mr. Finch's condescending air curdled into visible discomfort. Then Eleanor turned to the final tab in the binder. "And then there is the matter of the medical emergency on August 8th, she said, her eyes locking onto Sam, A panicked call was made to my client regarding a placental abruption, a truly terrifying event. Except, she paused, letting the weight of her next words settle. We have a sworn affidavit from the head of admissions at City General Hospital confirming that Mrs. Brooks was not a patient on that day, or any other day. The silence that followed was deafening. Sam's composure finally shattered. A faint, mottled flush crept up her neck. David looked as if he was going to be physically ill. Mr. Finch, flustered and visibly angry at being blindsided, turned to me. "Mrs. Brooks," he snapped, his patronizing tone gone. "Do you have anything to say in response to this aggressive and one-sided portrayal of your family's private matters?" I felt Elaine's hand give my own a reassuring squeeze under the table. I drew a deep breath and looked across the vast, polished expanse of the table, not at the lawyers, but directly at my son. "There is no misunderstanding here, David," I said, my voice clear and steady. "There was only my trust and your betrayal. This meeting isn't about family harmony. It's about accountability." That was Eleanor's cue. "On the subject of accountability," she said, pulling a final crisp document from her briefcase. She slid a copy across the table to Mr. Finch, who picked it up as if it were contagious. "What you have there," Eleanor explained calmly, "is a legally binding repayment demand and promissory note. It outlines the Tamwi Ba, Haichumnamui transferred by my client to your client over the last 3 years, which we have legally reclassified as a series of personal loans. The note demands repayment in structured installments, beginning in 30 days. It is secured by a lien against all assets of Innovate Solutions, what little there are, and more importantly, against Mr. Brooks's personal property." She leaned back in her chair. "Should he default, we will, of course, move to liquidate immediately. Checkmate." David stared at the paper, his face a pale mask of horror. He was trapped. To fight it would be to admit in court that the money wasn't a loan, but a gift he had taken under false pretenses, an admission of fraud. To sign it was to accept a mountain of debt he had no hope of repaying. I watched Sam's face. All traces of the soft, vulnerable victim were gone. She was staring at David with an expression of pure, unadulterated fury. It wasn't the look of a wife whose partner was under attack. It was the look of a co-conspirator whose partner had just failed, spectacularly. Eleanor stood, signaling the meeting was over. Elaine and I rose with her, gathering our things. As we turned to leave, a choked, desperate whisper came from across the table. "Why?" I stopped at the door and turned back. I looked at my son, this shell of a man surrounded by the wreckage he had made, and I felt nothing but a sad, quiet finality. There was no anger left. "You kept asking me for seed money, David," I said, my voice soft but clear. "I've finally decided to fund my own venture." Then I walked out of that cold, silent room and didn't look back. That evening my kitchen was filled with the warm, comforting smell of brewing tea. Elaine was perched on a stool, her laptop open on the counter. "Okay," she said, her eyes sparkling. "I've found it. 2 weeks. A little villa overlooking Lake Como. It has a garden." She turned the screen towards me. The picture was beautiful, a stone terrace, vibrant flowers, and the impossibly blue water of the lake stretching out to the mountains. It was the Italy from my dreams. For the first time in years, it felt real. "Book it, Elaine," I said, a smile spreading across my face, a smile that felt earned, that felt like my own. "Book it now." She clicked the button, and as we raised our mugs of tea, we weren't toasting a victory or an escape. We were toasting a beginning, my beginning.